On October 9, 2002, at exactly 9:47 a.m., Aileen Wuornos was asked if she had any final words. Her response was haunting. "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mother ship and all. I'll be back, I'll be back." 7 minutes later, she was dead. But the story of her final 24 hours reveals something far more complex than the monster the media portrayed. Today, we examine not just how Aileen Wuornos died, but what her final day tells us about justice, mental health, and a system that failed her from the very beginning. Before we dive into Aileen's final day, we need to understand who she was beyond the headlines. This isn't about glorifying violence or sensationalizing death. It's about examining a deeply troubled woman whose story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about trauma, justice, and redemption. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos killed 7 men along Florida highways. She claimed self-defense, saying each man had either assaulted or attempted to sexually assault her. The prosecution painted her as a cold-blooded killer who murdered for money. The truth, as we'll see, was far more complicated. By October 2002, Aileen had spent over 10 years on death row. She had exhausted her appeals, dismissed her lawyers, and repeatedly stated she wanted to die. Her final 24 hours would reveal a woman who was simultaneously defiant and broken, coherent and delusional, victim and perpetrator. What do you think? Was Aileen Wuornos a monster, or was she the final victim of a lifetime of abuse? Let me know in the comments. But first, let's examine her last day on Earth. To understand Aileen's final hours, we need to know her story. Born in 1956, she never met her father, who was later imprisoned for child sexual assault and died by suicide in prison. Her mother abandoned her when she was 4, leaving Aileen with abusive grandparents. By age 11, she was trading sexual favors for food and cigarettes. At 14, she was pregnant after being sexually assaulted by a family friend. At 15, she was homeless, living in the woods and surviving through prostitution. Between ages 14 and 22, she attempted suicide 6 times. The murders began in 1989. Her first victim was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner. What the jury didn't know during her trial was that Mallory had previously been convicted of attempted sexual assault. This crucial information was ruled inadmissible, though it supported Aileen's claim of self-defense. 6 more men died over the next year. All were found shot with a .22 caliber weapon. All were picked up while Aileen was working as a prostitute along Florida highways. Her capture came through her partner, Tyria Moore, whom Aileen later called the love of her life. Moore cooperated with police, helping them record phone conversations where Aileen confessed to protect Moore from prosecution. The woman who entered death row in 1992 was already broken. By October 2002, she was something else entirely. Aileen's decade on death row was marked by increasing paranoia and mental deterioration. Initially, she maintained her innocence, claiming self-defense. But as years passed, her story changed. In 2001, she wrote to the Florida Supreme Court, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice. And I'd do it again, too. There's no chance in keeping me alive or anything, because I'd kill again." But this wasn't the end of her contradictions. In private interviews, she continued to claim self-defense, suggesting her public statements were motivated by a desire to end her appeals and expedite her execution. Her mental state became increasingly fragmented. She accused prison guards of poisoning her food with dirt, saliva, and urine. She claimed they were trying to drive her to suicide before her execution. She complained of sonic pressure, crushing her head, and described various forms of psychological torture. Mental health experts diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. She scored 32 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist, with 30 being the cutoff for psychopathy. Yet questions remained about her competency to make decisions about her own execution. The woman preparing for her final day was not the same person who had committed those murders 12 years earlier. Prison, isolation, and her own psychological demons had transformed her into someone even more troubled and complex. Let's now enter Aileen's final 24 hours. It's October 8, 2002, approximately 6 p.m. Aileen Wuornos sits in her cell at Florida State Prison, knowing she will die the next morning. Prison records show she was remarkably calm. Guards reported she seemed almost relieved. She had refused her right to a final meal, which could have been anything costing under $20. Instead, she requested only a cup of coffee. She declined visits from clergy. She had no family members who wanted to see her. Her only visitor was her spiritual advisor, Aileen Wuornos, who had legally adopted Aileen in 1991 after seeing her photograph in a newspaper. That evening, Aileen gave her final interview to filmmaker Nick Broomfield. Her words were rambling, paranoid, but also strangely lucid. She spoke of being tortured by prison staff, of mind control, of wanting to escape this world to meet Jesus and the angels. But perhaps most tellingly, she turned her anger towards society itself. An abused woman got executed and was used for books and movies and shit. Her final recorded words to Broomfield were, "Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my life." As night fell on October 8th, Aileen Wuornos tried to sleep for the last time. Prison logs show she was awake most of the night, pacing her cell, occasionally talking to herself. Guards described her as agitated but not violent. What was going through her mind? Was she thinking of her victims? Her childhood? Tyria Moore? We'll never know. But as dawn approached, she prepared for her final performance. At 6 a.m. on October 9th, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was awakened for her execution. She had been on death row for 3,653 days. Prison staff reported she was surprisingly cooperative. She ate a light breakfast and drank her requested coffee. She was allowed a shower and given clean clothes. For the first time in years, she seemed almost peaceful. At 9:30 a.m., she was escorted to the execution chamber. The room was small, clinical, with a gurney in the center. A handful of witnesses watched through glass windows: journalists, victim family members, and prison officials. Aileen was strapped to the gurney with leather restraints, and 4-line was inserted into her arm. She was asked if she had any final words. This is when she gave her bizarre statement about sailing with the Rock and returning like Independence Day. To those present, it seemed like the final rambling of a disturbed mind. But some experts later suggested it might have been her way of maintaining control, refusing to give society the remorseful confession they wanted. At 9:47 a.m., the lethal injection began. The first drug, sodium pentothal, was designed to render her unconscious. The second, pancuronium bromide, paralyzed her respiratory system. The third, potassium chloride, stopped her heart. Witnesses reported that Aileen appeared to lose consciousness quickly. Her breathing became shallow, then stopped. At 9:54 a.m., she was pronounced dead. The execution of Aileen Wuornos made headlines worldwide. She was only the second woman executed in Florida since 1976, and the 10th woman executed in the United States since the restoration of capital punishment. But the reactions were deeply divided. Victim family members expressed relief that justice had been served. Some said they could finally find peace knowing their loved one's killer was dead. However, mental health advocates and some legal experts questioned whether executing someone with such severe psychological damage was justice or vengeance. They argued that Aileen's childhood trauma, combined with her mental illness, should have warranted life imprisonment rather than death. Filmmaker Nick Broomfield, who had documented her case extensively, called her execution state-sponsored murder. He argued that society had failed her at every turn. As a child, as a victim of abuse, and finally as a defendant who never received adequate mental health treatment. After her death, Aileen's body was cremated. Her ashes were scattered beneath a tree in Michigan by her childhood friend Dawn Botkins. There was no funeral, no memorial service, no final goodbye from the family that had abandoned her decades earlier. The story of Aileen Wuornos didn't end with her execution. If anything, her death sparked even more debate about justice, mental health, and how society treats its most vulnerable members. Her case highlighted the complex relationship between trauma and violence. Studies show that childhood abuse significantly increases the risk of later criminal behavior, particularly among women. Aileen's story became a case study in how early intervention might prevent tragedy. The 2003 film Monster, starring Charlize Theron, brought renewed attention to her story. Theron's Oscar-winning performance humanized Aileen in a way that news reports and court proceedings never could. The film forced audiences to confront uncomfortable questions about sympathy, justice, and the nature of evil. But perhaps most importantly, her case exposed flaws in how the justice system handles defendants with severe mental illness. The question of whether someone with borderline personality disorder and a history of severe trauma can truly be held fully responsible for their actions remains contentious. Today, over 20 years after her execution, Aileen Wuornos remains a polarizing figure. To some, she was a cold-blooded killer who got what she deserved. To others, she was the final victim of a system that failed her from birth. The final 24 hours of Aileen Wuornos reveal a woman who was simultaneously perpetrator and victim, monster and human being. Her last day on Earth was marked by the same contradictions that defined her entire life: defiance and resignation, clarity and confusion, hatred and a desperate search for peace. Her execution didn't provide the closure that many hoped for. Instead, it left us with more questions than answers. Was justice served? Could this tragedy have been prevented? What do we owe to those who have been broken by circumstances beyond their control? These are the questions that Aileen Wuornos' story forces us to confront. They don't have easy answers, but they demand our attention. What do you think? Was Aileen Wuornos' execution justice, or did the system fail her one final time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video made you think, please like and subscribe for more thoughtful examinations of complex true crime cases.